Hello, dear viewers. Today we will dive into the world of vampires, one of the most mysterious, terrifying, and alluring creatures in human history. These mythical creatures of darkness have been captivating our imagination, triggering our fears, and mesmerizing us for centuries. In this video, we will delve deep into the history of vampires, their legends, their place in popular culture, and even what modern science has to say about them. Do vampires really exist? Why are they so popular? And most importantly, what do these legends tell us about humanity? We will look for answers to all these questions together. Vampire legends are as old as human history. From ancient Mesopotamia to ancient Greece, from China to medieval Europe, there are stories of blood-drinking and immortal beings in many cultures. In Mesopotamia, evil spirits called Ekimu were believed to feed by sucking the blood of the living. These were the spirits of the dead who had not been buried properly or had been forgotten, and were believed to return to take revenge on the living. In ancient Greek mythology, there were female blood-drinking monsters, such as Empusa and Lamia. Empusa was a shape-shifting female monster with a donkey hoof for a foot. She seduced young men and then drank their blood. Lamia was a monster in Greek mythology who kidnapped and ate children. According to legend, Lamia was the lover of Zeus and was cursed by Hera's jealousy. This curse forced her to eat children. In China, creatures called Zhangshi had similar characteristics to vampires in the West. Zhangshi were often depicted as corpses possessed by the spirits of dead bodies. These creatures absorbed the life energy of the living. But it would take until the Middle Ages to lay the foundations for the image of the vampire as we know it today. From the 11th century onwards, stories began to spread in Europe, especially in Eastern Europe, about the dead rising from their graves to suck the blood of the living. Many factors contributed to the spread of these stories. First of all, the lack of medical knowledge at the time meant that the process of decomposition was not fully understood. When graves were opened, the sight of rotting corpses frightened people. For example, the accumulation of gases in the body during decomposition causes the body to swell and the skin to turn red. This could lead to the mistaken impression that the corpse had drunk blood. Also, nails and hair continued to grow for some time after death, giving the impression that the corpse was still alive. In addition, in times of epidemics, it was believed that the dead would return and infect the living, as it was not understood how the disease spread. Especially during the plague epidemics, this belief became even stronger. People were rapidly losing loved ones and struggled to understand the cause of these losses. The medical understanding of the time also contributed to the spread of vampire legends. The four humors theory suggested that an imbalance of fluids in the body caused disease. Blood was one of these fluids, and loss or excess of blood was believed to cause various ailments. In the 18th century, Europe experienced a vampire panic. Especially in Eastern Europe, it became a common practice to open the graves of the dead and kill the corpses, believing them to be vampires. During this period, various methods were developed to kill vampires. Staking the heart, cutting off the head, stuffing garlic in the mouth, and burning the corpse were the most common methods. While these practices may seem barbaric today, at the time, they were ways people dealt with their fears. Various measures were also taken to keep vampires away. Practices such as hanging garlic on the doors and windows of houses, pouring salt on thresholds, and planting crosses on graves were common. Many of these practices are still practiced in different cultures. One of the most famous 18th century vampire cases was that of Arnold Pauli. It happened in 1727 in Serbia and was the culmination of the vampire panic in Europe. After the death of a man named Arnold Paul, many people in the village died mysteriously, leading to the spread of vampire rumors. The incident became so serious that leading medical authorities of the time were sent to the region to investigate. As a result of the examinations, it was reported that the corpses were not decomposed and that blood was coming from their mouths. These reports further strengthened the belief in vampires. It was in the 19th century that vampire legends truly entered popular culture. In 1819, John Polidori's short story The Vampire is considered the beginning of modern vampire literature. This story was about Lord Ruthven, an aristocratic and sophisticated vampire. Interestingly, Polidori wrote this story during his time as the doctor to the famous poet Lord Byron. Some critics even suggest that the character of Lord Ruthven was inspired by Lord Byron. Throughout the 19th century, the vampire theme grew in popularity in Gothic literature. Works such as James Malcolm Rymer's Varney the Vampire and Sheridan Le Fanu's Carmilla added new dimensions to the vampire mythology. However, the real rise of the vampire came with Bram Stoker's novel Dracula, published in 1897. Drawing on earlier vampire stories, Eastern European folklore, and historical sources, Stoker created the image of the vampire we know today. Stoker's character of Count Dracula was partly inspired by Vlad Tepes, the 15th century Prince of Wallachia. Vlad Tepes, also known as Vlad the Impaler, was famous for the brutal punishments he inflicted on his enemies. The character of Count Dracula, created by Stoker, laid the foundation for the image of the vampire as we know it today. Noble, charismatic, yet terrifying and dangerous, Dracula changed the vampire myth forever. The 1922 film Nosferatu was the first major production to bring vampires to the silver screen. This silent film by F.W. Murnau, with Max Schreck's unforgettable performance, added a new dimension to the image of the vampire. Unlike Dracula, the vampire was portrayed as an ugly and frightening creature. But it was Dracula, played by Bela Lugosi in 1931, that cemented vampire's place in popular culture. Lugosi's stylish, charismatic, and somewhat sexy Dracula reshaped the image of the vampire. This movie inspired many vampire movies to be made in the following years. In the 1950s and 60s, the British Hammer Film Productions produced a series of Dracula films starring Christopher Lee. These films added more blood, violence, and sexuality to vampire stories, transforming the vampire mythology into a more adult content. In 1976, Anne Rice's novel, Interview with the Vampire, was published. This book took vampire stories to a new dimension. Rice's vampires were complex characters with deep thoughts and existential crises. This approach profoundly influenced vampire literature in the following years. The 80s and 90s saw vampires become even more mainstream in popular culture. Productions such as The Lost Boys, Blade, and Buffy the Vampire Slayer brought vampires to the masses. In these productions, vampires sometimes appeared as villains, sometimes as good, and sometimes as anti-heroes. In the 2000s, vampires once again gained immense popularity. Productions such as True Blood, the Twilight series, and The Vampire Diaries put vampires at the center of romantic relationships. In these productions, vampires were often portrayed as more human, even romantic characters. What about in the real world? What do scientists think about vampires? Of course, modern science does not accept the existence of blood-drinking immortal beings, but they can explain some of the facts behind vampire legends. For example, a rare blood disease called porphyria may have contributed to the creation of vampire legends. This disease causes the skin to become hypersensitive to sunlight and teeth to take on a reddish color. Also, the fact that people with this disease need blood transfusions may be the source of the blood-drinking legend. People with porphyria experience severe pain and blistered skin when exposed to sunlight. This parallels the myth of vampires avoiding sunlight. Also, in some types of porphyria, the patient's urine takes on a purplish color, which may feed the myth of drinking blood. Another theory is that rabies may have influenced vampire legends. Rabies causes aggression, photosensitivity, and foaming at the mouth in humans. These symptoms are similar to some of the features in vampire stories. Rabies patients are often afraid of water, hydrophobia, and uncomfortable with light. They may also become aggressive and have a tendency to bite in the later stages of the disease. These symptoms are similar to some of the behaviors in vampire stories. Archaeological findings also shed light on the origins of vampire legends. For example, some skeletons found in Bulgaria were found with stakes driven into their chests. This shows how widespread the belief in vampires was at the time. In 2012, 2 skeletons were found in Sozopol, Bulgaria, with iron stakes driven through their chests. Archaeologists believe this practice was done to prevent the dead from returning as vampires. Such findings show the historical authenticity of the vampire belief. Modern genetic studies have discovered gene variations that enable some people to live longer than others. This could be one of the scientific facts behind the myths of immortality. For example, research on telomeres shows that some people genetically age more slowly. Telomeres are pieces of DNA at the ends of chromosomes that shorten with each cell division. In some people, this shortening process happens more slowly, which could mean a longer lifespan. Furthermore, some recent research suggests that transplanting blood from young people into the elderly can slow down the aging process. This could be seen as a modern interpretation of the vampire idea of drinking blood for youth and immortality. In a 2005 experiment, when old mice were transfused with blood from young mice, the muscle and liver tissues of the old mice were observed to rejuvenate. This study shows that there may be a scientific basis for the idea of rejuvenation through blood. Of course, in the real world, there are creatures that feed on blood. Vampire bats are a prime example. These bats feed on the blood of other mammals, but they rarely prefer human blood. And they're definitely not like the vampires of legend. Vampire bats feed on the blood of cattle. They make small cuts in the animals with their sharp teeth and prevent the blood from clotting with their anticoagulant saliva. They can drink up to half their body weight in one meal. Today, vampires continue to be an indispensable part of popular culture. From Halloween costumes to goth subculture, the image of the vampire can be seen in many areas. Vampires also play an important role in the music world. From the names of bands like Vampire Weekend to the image of vampires in the goth and metal music scene, the music industry makes extensive use of vampire mythology. Video games turn vampire mythology into an interactive experience. Games like Vampire: The Masquerade and Castlevania series immerse players in the vampire world. In these games, vampires sometimes appear as characters controlled by the player, and sometimes as enemies to be defeated. Vampires are still a popular topic in the literary world. From Anne Rice's Vampire Diaries series to Stephen E. Meyer's Twilight series, vampires are constantly reinterpreted by different authors. Vampire legends also affect the tourism industry. Bran Castle in Romania is marketed as the home of Dracula and attracts thousands of tourists every year. The American city of New Orleans organizes vampire tours as the setting for Anne Rice's vampire novels. The world of science continues to study vampire myths. Anthropologists, historians, and psychologists are investigating the cultural and psychological origins of the vampire myth. These studies provide valuable insights into humanity's fears, desires, and beliefs. What about you? Do you believe that vampires are real? Maybe a vampire is watching this video right now, who knows? Jokes aside, vampires may not be real, but their story teaches us a lot. Our fears, our desires, our quest for immortality. Vampire legends actually reflect humanity's deepest impulses and fears. Perhaps vampires are a reflection of the dark side of humanity, a manifestation of our desire for immortality, our obsession with youth, our desire for power and control. Or perhaps they simply represent our fear and attraction to the unknown. And who knows, maybe we all have a little vampire inside us. The desire to live forever, the courage to pursue passions, the ability to glow in the dark. This is the end of this video, and I hope you learned something new about vampires. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like the video. See you in the next video, take care, and be careful at night. Who knows, maybe you'll meet a vampire.